Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
If you agree that exposing this kind of information creates harm, therefore you're unwilling to share it, why are your lawyers arguing in federal court that there was no injury and no harm created by your data breach? How should she manage this budget shortfall while she's working full-time at your bank? And I'll be happy to send you a copy of the textbook that I wrote.
The interrogation skills of Democratic Congresswoman Katie Porter might come in handy when the Treasury Secretary returns on Tuesday to testify before the Financial Services Committee, in which Ms. Porter is a member. And Congresswoman Porter from California is joining me right now. Nice. You have some good skills there. I was listening, and you don't let people off the hook. And look, you remember the last time that the Secretary testified before your committee. It got confrontational. Let's remind the viewers a bit about this. Here it is, everyone.
If you'd wish to keep me here so that I don't have my important meeting and continue to grill me, then we can do that. I will cancel my meeting and I will not be back here. I will be very clear if that's the way you'd like to have this relationship.
You are free to leave anytime you want. You may go anytime you want.
Please dismiss everybody. I believe you're supposed to take the gravel and bang it.
Please do not instruct me as to how I'm to conduct this committee.
What are your expectations on Tuesday? Do you expect the tone to be different? And I'm curious what you want to ask him.
Well, I hope the tone will be different. I think that we need to try to calm things down and allow Congress to do its work. I hope that Secretary Mnuchin arrives with that kind of attitude, a real willingness to let Congress do its job. It's not Congress's duty to kowtow to the president or to his appointed secretary. It's our job to conduct appropriate oversight. So I plan to try to be professional, but I am going to ask hard questions. That's my duty as a member of Congress. It's a co-equal branch of government to the presidency, and I think this president's struggling with that concept.
Here's the other concept of a tough question, because the chairwoman of your committee says she wants to ask the secretary whether the president directed him not to release his tax returns. Do you have any indications that, Matt, that may indeed be the case?
I think we absolutely have to ask that question. Look, the law is very clear here. It's in our tax code. It's an old law passed in 1924. And what it says is that upon the request of Congress, the Secretary of the Treasury shall release the tax returns of any taxpayer. And this law was passed in the wake of scandals, and it was explicitly designed to level the playing field between Congress and the president. At that time, the president could request tax returns, but Congress couldn't. So the law here is extremely clear. Congress has issued this subpoena, and so Minister Mnuchin needs to come answer to why he's defying Congress's lawful request here.
You have reminded me of the huge uproar over the interpretation of the word shall. Did that take you by surprise? That was used any which way to try to back up whatever perspective people were offering. It was remarkable.
Truly, it is remarkable, because I'll tell you, as a law professor and somebody who teaches statutory interpretation, there is only one way to interpret that word.
Right.
That is a word in the legal sense that we know. It means it's a mandate. There is no opportunity to skate this. If there was a legitimate legal argument, the Treasury Secretary could petition the court and try to get an interpretation on the facts. What you can't do is just flat out refuse to comply with a congressional request. That is upsetting the rule of law, setting the system of checks and balances in this country, and our country deserves more from this president.
Let's discuss this, because I want to ask you about Congressman Justin Amash becoming the first Republican lawmaker to say the president has committed impeachable offenses. You have said impeachment is not a top priority for you. Does this at all change the equation for you? Does it add any pressure on Democrats to start impeachment proceedings, protect constitutional rights that Congress has to do oversight?
So, look, what I said is, and this remains true, that when I'm in the 45th District, as I am every weekend and many weeks, I don't hear a lot about impeachment from my constituents. I get questions about prescription drug pricing.
Right.
I get lots of questions about pre-existing conditions, about infrastructure. These are real problems on the minds of the American people. My constituents don't ask me very frequently about impeachment. But to be clear, I've read the Mueller report. There is significant findings in the Mueller report, including in the concluding sentences, in which the Mueller report says, if we knew the president had not obstructed justice, we would say that, and we declined to do so. And so it is very clear, if you read the Mueller report, that there is a need for Congress to continue to do the oversight necessary to make a decision about whether or not we should begin impeachment. I also want to remind the American people, impeachment isn't a conviction. Impeachment in the House is a decision that there is enough evidence that we should send the situation forward to the United States Senate, which is the body that will conduct a trial and do additional fact-finding and determination. So the House's job here is to reach a different evidentiary threshold than the Senate, who would actually be this body that would decide whether or not the president had, in fact, committed obstruction of justice. Our job is to see, is there enough evidence to push this forward?
It is Monday, the 20th of May of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. It's, of course, been one of those weekends, as all the weekends have been since that terrible January day. Oh, it's just one thing after another, and it never stops. Well, one thing that stopped was Game of Thrones. Did you know that Game of Thrones started the same year that Netroots Radio did? And Netroots Radio is lasting longer. So far, we haven't really had a Iron Throne. There were a few wrinkles that we had to iron out on the Iron Throne, and we did. So here we are. Yeah. And Big Bang Theory is getting off the air, too. Wouldn't that be a great mashup? Game of Thrones and Big Bang Theory somehow meeting in the, I don't know, the little space between the panes of time. And I don't mean hurtful pain. I'm talking about window pane. Where's this going? I don't know. It's Monday. We've had to slice and dice and put together all the leftovers into really a quite lovely gourmet dish. River City Hash Mondays. That's what we do. Trump was on the Twitter machine this morning complaining about Twitter not tweeting his tweets. He was complaining about Deutsche Bank and how it's all a hoax and he doesn't need to get laundered money and he doesn't need this and that because he's like one of the greatest businessmen that ever businessmanned any time in the history of businessmen. And we know that's a lie. But hey, the guy says it and his people believe it. And when I say his people, I'm not just talking about the people in the White House, because the people in the White House don't believe anything he says. But they're there to get what they want. And he's their vehicle. And they're going to put up with it because they're repugs. That's what they do. When I say his people, I'm talking about the sycophants, the cultists, the Trump bros, the MAGA hatters. Doesn't matter what he does. If he's taking laundered money, it's sticking it to the man. Okay? If he's going to pardon war criminals, he's sticking it to the man. All right. You know, I have enough family members in the military. I am descended from a Revolutionary War general, one by the name of Israel Putnam, second in command to George Washington in the Continental Army, who did coin the phrase, not at Bunker's Hill, no matter what they say. It wasn't Bunker's Hill, it was Breed's Hill, which is the hill over the way. He coined the phrase, do not shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. And because of that military historical background in the family, we kind of took the military somewhat seriously now, didn't we? And one of those constants was the concept of a code. Yes, a code of honor. And if you're shooting 12-year-old girls in floral dresses with a floral hijab and laughing about it, shooting them dead. If you're, well, I'm sorry, it's Monday morning, but let's be clear here. These are the people that Trump wants to pardon. If in your interrogation you just decided to stab the prisoner in the neck and then try to disembowel him, and then complain to your subordinates that they better not report that or else, that is a violation of a code. And these horrendous acts go on. He wants to pardon Eric Prince's Blackwater war criminals who fired on that square and killed all those civilians. Fill the area with lead. Figure it out later. That's how we fight wars, folks. I'm a little upset now, aren't I? What's on the rest of the menu? Well, Katie Porter out of California there. Orange County, by the way. U.S. Representative Katie Porter. And she's on the Financial Services Committee. And Auntie Maxine is the chair of that. Thank you very much. Well, you know what? She has no more F's to give when Mnuchin testifies again tomorrow, Tuesday. Clear violation of the law. I don't want to hear law and order from any of these so-called conservatives ever again. They never believed in law and order. They pandered to the lowest common denominator because what did they want? It's not just tax cuts. It's power. And on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, a new report on the horrific sex abuse at Ohio State does not exonerate Jim Jordan, no matter what he says. There are disturbing connections between Trump, Putin, and Austrian neo-Nazis. And player empowerment is taking women's sports to new heights. What's good for the sportsman is good for the sportswoman. And after the break, we then move to the chef's table, where, avoiding a clash with the EU, Swiss voters approved even tighter gun controls. See, they can do it. And protesters promise that a snarling orange Trump baby blimp will mock Donnie Two Scoops outside of Parliament when he makes a state visit to Britain next month. Well, they promised. And they better keep their promise. All that and more. On West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link. Do check in there. Kelly Lincoln monitors that quite often, by the way. So do engage there. If you would then please look to the leftish from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. The contribute link is right there, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, I got to tell you, after 8 years, even though we had to get newish machinery right about halfway from where we are now, we're due again. Machinery does wear out, and we are saving our money and wish to be able to purchase newish machinery to replace what we have. And but I got to tell you, the old machines will work in tandem with the newish machinery until they wear out like the others did. So we also, of course, have recurring bills that happen on a recurring basis about the same time every month. And your contribution, recurring contribution, helps us mitigate that and pay those bills. We're unable to do this without you. So thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio, do so simply at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. I am at Justice Putnam, and I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. And get podcasts of the show by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, iTunes, YouTube, and wherever podcasts can be found. Well, what a weekend again. We had a bit of rain here, which is good. Minerals from the sky on my garden is good. We're expecting somewhat of rain. I'm giving a weather report early, aren't I? We're expecting some rain today. And not as much as we had over the weekend. And maybe a bit tonight and tomorrow, and then the rest of the week probably will just dry out and not be so rainy. But we do have some rain coming in, and it's good. My garden is doing so lovely. Also, it's kind of funny trying to convince people of the obvious, because the obvious explanation on why the gardens everywhere around here are doing so well is because of the tremendous fires that we had last summer, in which copious amounts of carbon went up in the sky and then rained back down. And I got to tell you, it charged the soil, fixing nitrogen and fixing carbon and all sorts of new, good things. And but you tell people that, they go, nah. So I guess those are the same kind of people that would believe climate change. There's no such thing as climate change. That's some sort of liberal hoax. While the rivers are flooding and the Midwest is underwater, I guess we're going to turn the Midwest back into the inland sea that it used to be way back in the day. Yeah, when our lizard brains were in lizard bodies. Jeez. Okay. If that's the way they want it. Mitch McConnell, speaking of lizards, is a turtle a lizard? No, maybe not. But still, that guy wants to erase 6 decades of progress. Social progress. This is a war that the South, and I have to say it's been emanating mostly from the South. And, so some Northern people got behind it. But it's just their Southern brethren moved north. They've been fighting this war since really before the Civil War. And even though they had their asses kicked, and they signed a surrender, they've continued to fight that war. And Mitch McConnell is the latest in that long line of, well, let's call them what they are, traitors to the United States. Disguised, well, it's even worse. When you are a traitor to the United States and you dress up in the uniform of the United States, and he's got the uniform of the U.S. Senate on his shoulders, and he's doing what he is doing, he's willing to sell out the United States and his state to the Russians. Yeah, that aluminum franchise, Rusal, is going to have a factory there, a little bit of payoff to Mitch on dropping the Magnitsky sanctions. Thank you very much. Yeah, we better get out and vote in such overwhelming numbers that any help they get cannot be utilized. 70,000 votes in 3 states is all it took last time. We have to stop that. Indeed. Well, let's get on with this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It's How to Think Progress, and by Lindsay Gibbs. Now, I'll just say right off the top, I'm no big fan of Jim Jordan. This is the kind of Tea Party, Freedom Caucus wing nut that I just can't stand. And that he had been a wrestling coach just makes it all the more salient. Talk about, some wrestling coaches are, shall we say, nutty. And this guy is pretty nutty. Richard Strauss, who worked as an Ohio State doctor from 1978 to 1998, sexually abused at least 177 men during his time at the university, according to a 182-page report released by the law firm Perkins Cole on Friday. The report detailed how Strauss, who committed suicide in 2005, would shower with student athletes, often multiple times a day, force them to strip naked during routine exams, sometimes for ailments as commonplace as a sore throat, and then did some other really sick things that I am not going to read about right now this early in the morning, or if you're listening to this on podcast, whenever it is, it's just too. And I say this from a professional standpoint. It's really icky. That's a professional term used in the industry. The issue is that this guy, Jim Jordan, who is using an abuse of power in the United States government right now, abused his power at Ohio State. Why is he not held to account? He worked as an assistant coach for the Ohio State wrestling team from 1986 to 1994 and has been accused by at least 8 former wrestlers of knowing about Strauss's abuse and failing to report it. Well, he was pleased with the report's findings. It confirms everything I've said before, Jordan told reporters on Capitol Hill. I didn't know about anything. If I would have, I'd have done something. Yeah, you would have done something, and you did do something, and that was nothing. I got to tell you, this is the kind of guy that probably blamed the victims. Probably thought, well, they had it coming. Look at them. That's what I think. Because this is not something new. I've seen this before. While the report did not mention Jordan by name, it also did not confirm that he knew nothing. In fact, according to the report, many former students interviewed were adamant that Strauss's abuse was an open secret on campus, that athletes, coaches, trainers, and administrative staff were all aware of Strauss's propensity to shower with students often multiple times a day, but took no steps to protect them. Now, over the past year, Jordan has repeatedly denied that he knew anything about Strauss's abuse except the locker room chatter he overheard. Conversations in a locker room are a lot different than people coming up and talking about abuse. No one ever reported any abuse to me. Well, I wonder why, Jim. Because you would have done nothing? Did anybody actually try to talk to you about it? And your demeanor was such that they figured, well, he's not the guy I'm going to go to. Are you really going to go to the nutty coach and tell them something as personal as that? In the same interview, Jordan attacked the motives of the men because that's what these wingnuts do. They attack the victim, saying that one of them had a vendetta against Ohio State. No, somebody said something bad about the Ohio State. Jordan also claimed that he was being bullied by Strauss's victims. See, the bullies are always the victims now, aren't they? And they were disappointed that he wasn't using his powerful platform to help them seek justice. But his denials have not satisfied the men he used to coach. There's no way, unless he's got dementia or something, that he's got no recollection of what was going on at Ohio State. One of Strauss's victims, former UFC world champion Mark Coleman, said, despite the allegations that Jordan knew about Strauss's abuse and did not act to protect student athletes, which led to widespread calls for his resignation, the Ohio congressman easily won another term in 2018, and now he currently serves in a leadership role on the House Oversight Committee. I think maybe he got a little bit of, well, shall we say, help on the county level from a hostile foreign power. Martin Longman of the Washington Monthly brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Ash Mondays. Donald Trump had not even been inaugurated on December 20th of 2016 when the author wrote Trump, Austrian neo-Nazis, and Putin, but he'd already detected a troubling nexus between the three, and this is how he began that piece. In the process of pointing out that their flirtations with John Birchers and other general right-wing nutballish behaviors are quickly turning the Trump administration into the grease trap of American political history, Charles Pierce stops to notice that incoming National Security Advisor Michael Flynn is still in league with the Ruskies, to wit, the lunatic far-right Austrian Freedom Party, led by Heinz Christian Strache, traveled to New York in November to meet with Flynn. The Freedom Party presidential nominee, Norbert Hofer, just came within a whisper of winning an revanchist Andalusian political victory in the early December election. He had hoped to do better, saying just prior to the vote that he was drawing encouragement from Donald Trump's presidential victory in the United States. The November meeting in Trump Tower between Flynn and Austrian neo-Nazis wasn't the reason that this author wrote the post, though. He was responding to an article in Foreign Policy that reported Heinz Christian Strache, Freedom Party leader, and Norbert Hofer, the candidate who narrowly lost Austria's presidential election, signed a working agreement on Monday with Russian President Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party, according to a statement from Austria's Freedom Party. Charles Pierce responded, "At the risk of being called a neo-McCarthyite, may I point out that this smacks an awful lot of incoming administration's involvement in a worldwide right-wing movement at the center of which is our good friend, Vladimir Putin." And then the author responded to Pierce, "Of course this is impossible because liberals have lived through the Cold War. Keep telling me that all this Russia bashing is just so much Dulles Brothers flim-flam designed to distract the plebes from their rightful destiny at the head of the dictatorship of the proletariat. To bash Russia is to bash the left here at home in order to crush the left everywhere from Ho Chi Minh City to Buenos Aires. It therefore cannot be that our president is in thrall, if not the control of a worldwide right-wing movement to restore the purity of essence to the European bloodstream and bring Christianity back to its former central and crusading glory. Or in other words, you need to check that grease trap of American political history carefully because a few of the roles have been reversed." The author revisits all this today because Heinz Christian Strache has just found himself in a pickle. He apparently took the working agreement with Putin a few steps too far, and he did it on a 6-hour videotape recorded in July of 2017. In truth, he was set up. By whom, it is not clear. People posing as highly connected Russians discussed various corrupt schemes that involved trading favorable contracts for assistance in helping Strache's political party in the upcoming elections. Now, Strache, who is currently Austria's vice chancellor and the head of the Freedom Party, took the bait and failed to notify the authorities that Russians were attempting to bribe him. Now, the author doesn't know who set up this trap and why they waited almost 2 years to expose Strache, but the episode provides one more example of how neo-Nazis believe that the Russians are their allies and to seek to work with them to further their political ambitions. We already know that Trump used the National Enquirer to help him cover up his affairs and promote his candidacy. We know that Flynn is currently awaiting sentencing after exposing attempts to bribe him into silence. Now we know that Heinz Christian Strache is not only a nexus between Trump and Putin, but corrupt to the core. We've seen the white nationalist strains of Trumpism and Trump's strange affinity for Putin, and yet somehow Trump says he's been exonerated. Brought us the first offering here in the Bistro Cafe, a West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and she brings us the final offering as well. And of course, she's out of Think Progress. Well, it looks like player empowerment is taking women's sports to new heights, as Lim Cambridge showed this last week. Female athletes have leverage now, and they are not afraid to use it. In a promising trend for professional athletes' labor rights, a growing number of NBA stars are opting to follow in the footsteps of LeBron James and take their careers into their own hands. These players are signing short-term contracts or demanding trades in order to have more control over the places they end up playing, as well as the people they end up playing for, referred to as player empowerment. This approach helps millionaire athletes regain a modicum of control from billionaire owners. But while NBA players have garnered the most attention for employing this tactic, the player empowerment movement in the WNBA is far more consequential to the sport itself, helping to take women's sports to new heights. WNBA stars are seizing command of their careers, despite the fact that society has told them at every turn that they should be grateful, subservient, and quiet purely because they have a league to play in. Would be a shame if something broke it now, wouldn't it, little lady? Women's sports have come a long way, but female athletes are not happy just to be there. They're willing to take big risks to improve their personal situation and forge a better future for the sport they love. This week saw the WNBA's most recent and most prominent player empowerment saga finally reach a conclusion when 6'8" Australian center Liz Cambridge was finally traded from the Dallas Wings to the Las Vegas Aces nearly 4 months after she made a trade request and made a mere 8 days before the 2019 WNBA season begins. This is fantastic news for anyone who loves women's basketball. It means the All-Star who was the runner-up to the 2018 MVP vote to Breanna Stewart of the Seattle Storm will be back in the league playing for a title contender under an established, successful coach, the Aces' Bill Laimbeer. Yes, that Bill Laimbeer from the Detroit Pistons, the guy with the elbows. Well. And she had to work incredibly hard to make this a reality. And she did. She'd been shuttled around and put with clubs that were really financially insolvent. Didn't get paid for a while, and other players didn't get paid either. And so she requested a trade, and it took forever, but now they finally have granted it to her. And this portends some great things for the rest of women's sports, and good thing too. All right, let's get to our break, and we'll come back and go through weather from around the world, and then finish up the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Alien meets Solaris. It's not an understatement to say that Claire Denis' High Life is a strange and arty film that doesn't go out of its way to appeal to anyone. It's a weird mix of sci-fi and horror and contains a lot of bodily fluids, but it somehow manages to come together and work. Set in the not-so-distant future, High Life tells the story of a group of convicts serving life sentences, or in some cases haven't been sentenced to death, but who are given the option of having their sentences commuted in order to serve science. They agree to journey into outer space towards a black hole in search of an alternative energy source after some vaguely referenced environmental disaster on Earth. The spaceship's crew is headed by a scarily demented scientist, Dr. Dibbs, played by Juliette Binoche, whom we learn in flashbacks was in prison herself for killing her own children. She's obsessed with trying to create the perfect child from the damaged DNA of her fellow convicts and space travelers. One of these convicts, Monty, played by Robert Pattinson, decides after a time he wants nothing to do with the experiments. He attempts to find some semblance of normalcy in space, even when a disaster leaves him as the sole beneficiary of Dr. Dibbs' experiments in the form of a daughter. Ultimately, they are the only survivors aboard the spacecraft, and this father-daughter relationship forms the strongest part of the movie. Pattinson, best known for playing Edward Cullen in the iconic Twilight series, shows that he has come into his own as an actor and can carry a movie, which he decidedly does here. While High Life may leave you feeling frustrated by unanswered questions or sometimes just wondering what's going on, it's nonetheless a genuinely artistic effort and worthy of a watch. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Steve Mirsky.
I'm an engineer. I've trained as an engineer. I have degrees in mechanical and chemical engineering, and some people claim that I practice chemistry without a license.
Frances Arnold, the Caltech scientist, shared the 2018 Nobel Prize in chemistry.
But what I care about is how do we share the planet with all the other living things and have a planet that's worth living in while we cure disease and make our quality of life better.
Arnold spoke April 9th at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C., at an event honoring 10 U.S. Nobel and Kavli Prize laureates. The evening was sponsored by the Kavli Foundation and produced by Scientific American. Arnold's Nobel Prize was for directing the evolution of enzymes to make them work even better or in entirely new ways.
And it seems to me that this tremendously powerful algorithm of evolution that create complexity and that create the materials and create all of the lovely things in the biological world, we should learn how to use that algorithm to solve the biggest problems that we face. How do we house, fuel, feed, clothe 10 billion people? And it's the biological world that can do this because we're learning how to harness this 4 billion years worth of work. The problem is no one knows how a sequence of DNA encodes a function. We can only read it. No one can compose that. But we have the process of composing it, and that is called evolution. And by using that process, we can make these things that will help us live sustainably. Because who knows how to use renewable resources? The biological world does. Biology can take carbon dioxide from the environment and create living plants and nitrogen and simple starting materials and create complicated, useful things. So I'm hoping that we too will learn how to do that and use our science to do that.
For Scientific American's 60 Second Science, I'm Steve Mirsky.
Sweetie, want some fruit?
You have to use the right tool for the job. A power drill is the wrong tool to slice fruit. Just like an antibiotic is the wrong tool to treat viruses, including colds and flu. Antibiotics are only needed for certain bacterial infections. When they aren't needed, antibiotics won't help you, and the side effects could still hurt you. Ask your healthcare professional when an antibiotic is the right tool and when it's not. Visit cdc.gov/antibiotic-use.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Here, there is nothing. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. There is nothing, the Guatemalans recently told New York Times correspondent Roger Cohen. Nothing from the government, nothing to do, no water, no healthcare, no jobs. What there is terrorism from the gangs and the parched earth dying from climate change. So what is the administration's response to these conditions in Central America that are forcing the migration north? To increase aid? To institute a Marshall Plan for the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador? No, says Trump. Rather, we should cut off all aid to those countries because they're not doing enough to stop migration. In other words, create more devastation, more homelessness, more hopelessness, and more refugees, which will ensure migrants continue to flee north. Trump's other response is to trumpet his proposed wall some more. But as Cohen put it, quote, no wall will stop the flow of migrants. No raging about rapists or threats to separate families will stop it. No racism against brown people or fear of demographic change will stop it. A broken immigration system certainly won't stop it. Not as long as Central Americans are desperate. The United States government has a policy now that will continue to create more and more migrants. More and more people seeking safety and refuge. There is no plan to create something out of nothing. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1926. That was the day President Calvin Coolidge signed the Railway Labor Act. For decades, railroad labor disputes had often become bloody affairs. The railroad companies hired gunmen who killed dozens of strikers in 1877. The strike was so violent, it became known as the Great Upheaval. In Scranton, Pennsylvania, for example, hired guns shot into an unarmed crowd of strikers. 3 innocent people were killed. In 1894, the Pullman strike had paralyzed interstate commerce and ended with violent repression by federal troops. Starting in 1888, the federal government passed a series of acts aimed at stopping these bloody battles. Then, during World War I, railroad operations came under government control. Labor disputes were sent to a national board of adjustment during the war. This all laid the groundwork for the Railway Labor Act. The goal was to find a better way to resolve railroad labor management disputes. Representatives from the railroad companies and the unions participated in drafting the act. It called for a system of mediation for railroad labor contracts, and only after the mediation had been exhausted could the parties attempt other means, such as strikes or lockouts. Most significantly, it recognized the right for railroad workers to unionize. Under the Act, employers can hire replacement workers during a strike, but they must take back the striking workers when the strike is over. For an industry that has had a notorious history for firing those who even hinted at a strike, this was an important change. In 1936, the Act was extended to include airline workers. The Act is considered an important step toward the creation of the National Labor Relations Act. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labor.
This is a Radio Labor report recorded on Monday, May 20th, 2019. I'm Mark Belanger. Behind crises such as global warming and the rise of authoritarian populism is a lack of brave, informed leadership. The solution is to help teachers educate the next generation. That is a central message being promoted by Education International. EI is the global union for teachers and other education workers. It has some 32 million members in 172 countries. David Edwards is Education International's General Secretary.
There is a general feeling right around the world that the planet itself is going through a leadership crisis. That at the root of the environmental crisis, the root of the financial crisis, the root of the education crisis, the root of the refugee crisis, is a leadership crisis. And what I feel is that at a time when it has become so much easier to communicate, people are trying to find opinions that support their own underlying convictions or underlying their own opinions in many ways. It's not a time particularly when ideas get challenged. It's a time that is very easily manipulated by a certain type of leadership, which is an opportunistic leadership that leans towards authoritarianism, that drives fear, that plays off of people's fears about the future, their insecurities about the present. And it tries to propose easy, if not completely false, solutions to the challenges that we're all facing. As we think about this sort of vacuum in terms of global leadership, and we think about all these different decisions and choices that our students have to make, that our communities need to make, that our politicians need to have the courage to make. But yet, if you look to the opinion pages, if you listen to the speeches, you find that there isn't really the kind of leadership that is anchored in the values and the principles that have gotten us out of the dark ages. I think there's sort of like an anti-intellectualism. People don't have the time to listen to deep or long analyses. They don't have the time to sort of try on different ways of thinking or knowing. And I already mentioned there's sort of the selective listening to things that support what we already, or the biases that we already hold. If you look around the world and you look at the crises and you think, well, if the politicians aren't going to be able to do this, the religious leaders aren't going to be able to do this, the young people are organizing themselves, but they don't necessarily have the structures. There are social movements that are afoot. Many are fantastic in terms of drawing attention to a given thing at a given moment, but they don't necessarily have the structures, the policies, the capacity, the legitimacy to transform those into action. The only profession that has both the wherewithal in terms of the legitimacy that they have because of where they come from, their communities, because they know people in their communities, the knowledge and wisdom that they have because they know their disciplines, they know history, they know their areas, the way they can communicate because they've been trained in communicating and their job is basically to communicate and to think, to help people think and to question. But all of that anchored in an ethos, in a sort of an ethical frame about why we do all of this and how do we marshal that knowledge for the common good. And I think those are teachers. And more specifically, I believe it is the organized, unionized global teacher movement that needs to lead right now because we are so connected, across all of the countries where we operate. We're in those communities. We can share what's happening with each other. We can speak truth to power. We can educate. We can dream. We can stand up and resist. We can organize, mobilize. We can vote. We can run for office. We can do a number of different things that I don't believe, if I look around the world, another profession or another vocation or another group of people that are solely committed to a singular purpose like we are, a couple of very important purposes. So it's really down to us. It's educated in their unions. They're going to have to take the lead.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 50 degrees Fahrenheit. We're looking to get to a high of about 68 to 70 degrees today. Quite a bit of chance of rain. There's a big cell moving our way. Winds are currently a negligible 1 to 2 miles per hour. We call that light and variable. Out of the southeast right currently, and it looks like it's going to continue out of that direction, though we'll be picking up to 10 to 20 miles per hour in a few hours. Rain increasing tonight, though it looks like we might have some rain earlier than that. About a tenth of an inch, a little bit more. Though tonight, the winds will be out of the due south at 5 to 10 miles per hour, though will bring with it over a third of an inch of rain tonight and another third of an inch tomorrow. So, and the winds will be light and variable then, but out of the south as well, bringing it quite a bit of moisture. And, I think it's okay. As I said before, minerals from the sky in my garden is a good thing. Grass pollen remains high. The air quality index has come down a bit since the end of last week at 13 parts per million in that good range. And the daytime UV index remains high at 7. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.67 inches. Visibility is down to 5 miles. And relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 66 and partly cloudy. Paris is 68 and cloudy. Rome is 65 and partly cloudy with a active weather advisory for thunderstorms in the area that might knock out electrical power in Rome itself. Kiev is 82 degrees and fair. Kabul is 75 degrees with showers in the vicinity. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and cloudy. Tokyo is 70 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 58 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 79 degrees Fahrenheit and partly cloudy. Though with the right kind of eyes, you might think it's partly sunny in New York. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Swiss voters agreed by a nearly 2-to-1 margin on Sunday yesterday to adopt tighter gun controls in line with changes to European Union rules, heading off a clash with Brussels. The measure passed in a binding referendum under the Swiss system of direct democracy by a 64 to 36% margin. Provisional final results showed the restrictions, which apply to non-EU member Switzerland because it is part of Europe's Schengen open border system, had raised hackles among shooting enthusiasts. Failure to adopt the rules could have forced Switzerland to leave the passport-free Schengen zone and the Dublin joint system for handling asylum seekers. After militants killed scores of people in Paris in 2015, the EU in 2017 toughened laws against purchasing semi-automatic rifles, such as the ones used in those attacks, and made it easier to track weapons in national databases. The initial EU proposal provoked an outcry because it meant a ban on the Swiss tradition of ex-soldiers keeping their assault rifles. Swiss officials negotiated concessions for veterans and gun enthusiasts who take part in the country's numerous shooting clubs. But any restrictions imported from the EU go too far for right-wing activists concerned about Swiss sovereignty. Of course they are. They must be listening to some other gun enthusiasts. To me, the new obligations linked to the possession of guns are not that restrictive, while the risk of not being able to benefit from Schengen's advantages are very real, said one bank employee who gave his name only as Philippe. It has nothing to do with blackmail. It is just that Switzerland has to align itself with a system to which it participates. Gun rights proponents complained the rules could disarm law-abiding citizens and encroach on Switzerland's heritage and national identity, which includes a well-armed citizenry. But their well-armed citizenry doesn't go out and shoot up the countryside and the people in it either, now do they?
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Guy Falconbridge and Alex Frazier of Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, a blimp depicting Donald Trump as a snarling, nappy-wearing orange baby will fly outside Britain's parliament when the U.S. president, and we don't use that P word here, but we will because these fellows are, makes a state visit next month if protesters can raise £30,000, which is $38,000 U.S., for the advocacy groups. At the invitation of Queen Elizabeth, Trump and Melania Trump are due in Britain on June 3rd and 5th for a state visit, a pomp-laden affair involving a carriage trip through London and a banquet at Buckingham Palace. Britain's so-called special relationship with the U.S. is one of the enduring alliances of the past century, but some British voters see Trump as crude, volatile, and opposed to their values on issues ranging from global warming to his treatment of women. The blimp greeted Trump when he visited Britain in 2018 in what he described as an attempt to make him feel unwelcome. Well, Donnie, that's exactly the point. And why? Because you are an unwelcome personage everywhere you go. No one likes you, Donnie. New York hates you. London hates you. America is beginning to really hate you. And the world has hated you for quite some time, especially Scotland. Especially Scotland. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. but you know that Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on. So we'll meet up here tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.